really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us for Senior Tech Coffee. Our topic for the day today is digital estate planning. And I would like to introduce our guest for today. His name is Rob Aghazarian. And Rob, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and just tell us a little about yourself, please.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me first, Patrick. I really appreciate this. It's an area that has been neglected for quite a bit of time, by attorneys as well. It is taking hold and becoming a normal part of everyday estate planning. That is exactly what I do. I do estate planning and probate administration. I've been in this particular area, specializing in it for about the last 25 years. Most of the work maybe about 50-50 is setting up estate plans and then administering estate for families that have lost a loved one. And I'm excited to discuss this idea today.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I was jumping around there. I accidentally changed slides and couldn't figure out how to get back for a second. Excellent. Yeah, this is, I think this is a timely topic for obvious reasons, but it's also something that I think is not necessarily something that folks generally think about when they're doing their estate planning, and then you touched on that to an extent. Let me just real quick give you the agenda for today. So for today's class, we're going to just basically talk about what is digital estate planning, what does that mean, and how is it, how do you address that as part of your estate plan. We'll talk briefly about how to organize your digital assets so that you can make sure those are accounted for as part of your estate planning. And I want to also make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. That being said, just a quick introduction for myself. Prime of Life Tech is my business. I'm an IT educator and consultant, and I provide tech support for older adults and small businesses, both remotely and on site. All our contact information for both Rob and myself I'll provide you at the end of the presentation. So let's talk briefly about digital estate planning. What is it? And Rob, I'm gonna just let you jump in and tell us what is this all about?
Sure. Let's start with what is estate planning, because that's going to,
sure.
Obviously digital is just one aspect of it. Estate planning in essence is people who plan for what's going to happen under certain circumstances. And an estate planning attorney helps draw up documents that will make those intentions enforceable. In particular, the situations are someone passes away, and in that case, you want to be able to transfer their estate, their assets, take care of their liabilities to the people that they intend them to go to. And estate planning does deal with what happens if somebody becomes incapacitated. That's not really of import today. Today it's just the estate planning part of it, what happens to your assets. When we're talking about pretty much everything, the standard way of doing it is either put a pay on death beneficiary on the asset so it automatically transfers, like life insurance is the most common example. But you could also do that for real estate or a brokerage account. You could also put those assets in a trust, and then the trust takes care of those assets. Or third, you leave it in your own name and you go to court after you die. Someone goes to court and with your will, and just transfers it at that time. So taking that information about taking your assets and making sure they're transferred, how does that apply to digital estate planning? Well, that's a good question. What is a digital asset? Digital estate planning deals with not just assets that are worth money, but also digital assets like emails. There's a story I read once where there was this young soldier. He was writing emails to his family every day home, and they would get them. And when he died in action, and his family wanted to hold a memorial and pull up those emails so that they could share his stories, and they didn't have access to those emails. And they went to, at that time, Yahoo, and Yahoo said, "I'm sorry, we can't let you have access to those." Since that day, things have changed quite a bit, and we have a statute here in Colorado that allows your personal representative of your state to be able to access those types of accounts. But part of what we're talking about today is the ability to know what those things are, what each account is, what are your passwords, what are your account numbers, or sign-on information, and who do you want to have access to that information, either when you become incapacitated or when you die. And so a lot of that needs to be put in writing so that we can enforce it. And a lot of what I do is going through all the different types of digital assets that someone might have, kind of taking an audit, and then helping them decide what should happen with that asset. And I think that's a large part of what we're doing today, is just to give you guys some ideas about what that looks like. Patrick?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. By the way, just a housekeeping note, I muted everyone except for Rob and myself, just to avoid background noise. So if you want to speak, you'll have to unmute yourself. If you're having trouble with that, just let me know. You can also message me over the chat, and you can also ask questions through the Zoom chat as well. So just FYI. So as Rob alluded to in just a moment ago, digital estate planning is essentially accounting for your digital assets as part of your estate plan. And the first thing is identifying what are those assets. And as he mentioned, it's not just tangible things like, I mean, it could be like your intellectual property for, say, a book that you've written, and the digital copy of that lives somewhere, for example. But things like your email, all the services that you use, like online banking, any brokerage accounts that you use their web portal or apps to access, excuse me, and social media, your Facebook account, your Twitter, your Instagram, or your LinkedIn account. So what you need to do, as Rob mentioned as well, is you'll have to identify your agent or your fiduciary, the person who you want to, the trusted individual that you want to manage these assets in your will and your trust and in the applicable powers of attorney for this type of thing. But then there's organizing your digital assets. There's instruments available. Rob has something that he uses with his clients to walk them through the process of identifying these things. But you can also get a head start by just documenting these things. Something as simple as the name of the service, the website address that you use to access that service, and then separately your login credentials, your username and password that an individual would need to get into those accounts. And then probably most importantly, or equally as important, is instructing your agent as to how you want your digital assets managed in the event of you're being incapacitated, or worst case, in the event of your demise. So, for example, do you want your Facebook account to stay online even after you've gone? Those kinds of questions are things that you might need to be thinking about. As far as identifying and documenting your digital assets, as I mentioned, starting a list, whether that's like in a Word document or a spreadsheet, something like that. And as for your login credentials, it is my very, very strong recommendation that people use a password manager application. That there's lots of options out there that are both free and paid versions. And there's some products that offer both a free and a paid version. So you could like do a trial of the paid version and see if the features that it has are something that you're interested in.
Could I ask real quick why you stress, because I have one, but there's a whole process of getting mine into Bitwarden was the one that someone recommended to me. So now I have a whole thing I've got to do, but what's the overall point of having a password manager?
So the overall point of having a password manager is essentially this. Passwords are your first line of defense against unwanted intrusion to your online accounts or online assets. You can look at it that way as well. You need to have strong, secure passwords so that you can prevent someone from trying to hack your accounts. A strong, secure password doesn't necessarily lend itself to being something you can commit to memory, first off, because a strong, secure password is actually, ideally, it's a password phrase, like something along the lines of like, I love walking the dog. Only you use a combination of upper and lowercase letters, you throw in some numbers and symbols in there. You want to make it something that's basically not easy to guess. Password 123, 123456, using the same password for multiple accounts, or God forbid, all of your online accounts. Those are just invitations for hacking, to be honest with you. My rule of thumb is this: if you have more than 3 passwords to remember, which is pretty much everybody, you need a password manager. Now, what are some of the advantages of having a password manager relative to your managing your digital assets? So first and foremost, you've organized your passwords in one place that's accessible to your agent or the trusted individual that you've designated in your power of attorney to access these accounts, and therefore the passwords needed to go into those. Secondly, there are, as we'll talk about here in a moment, there are certain online services where you are able to designate a basically, what do they call it? A legacy contact. In other words, someone who has permission to access those accounts is essentially the brief way of saying that. But as far as the password manager is concerned, some of those products also have this digital legacy feature where you can specify an individual who has permissions to access your passwords. In addition, there are products out there that have family plans where you can all use the same product, and that's for a discount. But also, you can designate who among your family has permission to access your passwords. So that's probably the main thing. What you don't want to do is create a Word document or a spreadsheet where you're documenting all of your online assets or accounts and have columns for username and password. That is not a secure way to store your passwords. If someone were to hack into your computer they would effectively have access to all your passwords. Likewise, if you were just using something like a Word document or a text file or a spreadsheet as your password manager, as it were, unless that was something that you have encrypted somehow, password protected, so that you have to have a password to get into the document itself, it's also wide open for usage by a hacker. Those, and I guess the other main point is that password managers typically have the ability for you to generate a secure password within the app itself. So in other words, if you are in the process of entering all of your online account information into a password manager, that, first off, that is the golden opportunity to update your password to something that's more secure if it's not already something that's fairly secure, or also to make sure it's not a duplication or a duplicate password for something else you're using. But there's usually like a generate button or something like that next to the password field, where the app itself will generate one of these secure passwords. Some of the password managers have the ability to go in and provide settings for the complexity of the password. So for example, how many characters long it should be at a minimum. I mean, I read somewhere once that you should have a secure password is like 20 characters long. Now, unless you have a password phrase like "I love to walk the dog," that's not going to be easy to remember, right? The other main advantage of having a password manager is that ultimately you only have one password to remember, and that is the one to get into your password manager. So that's so to answer your question, Joyce, that's really those are really the key points for having a password manager in the first place, but also how it ties in to your estate planning is that your agent, the person in your power of attorney, they know where to go to get to all of your passwords. That should be spelled out for them in the instructions that you provide, so that when they want to go in and and this could apply if, for that matter, if say for example, Joyce, God forbid, you were in a coma, right? And you're the person that pays all the bills in the family. Somebody needs to be able to log in and pay the Excel bill, pay the phone bill, pay the mortgage, all that kind of stuff. If you're not the person who does those things and they're done online, that can just create headaches for everybody. So anyhow,
thank you.
Oh, of course, you bet. The other point that I want to make here is to ensure that you back up all of your data. It's extremely important that the data that you have that you want to preserve for your survivors or for your other family members, if you're disabled only, is to make sure that you have current accessible backups in case your survivors or your family members need to access anything of importance that you store on your computer. You have a couple options here. There are numerous backup programs you can use, including stuff that's just native to both Windows and to the Mac OS. You can back up your data to an external hard drive, which I strongly recommend. If you can have redundant hard drives, even better. But also consider the cloud. There might be some subset of your data that you may not want, like the entirety of all of your personal data backed up in the cloud, but there may be some subset of that you absolutely want in the cloud, so that if for whatever reason your computer or those external hard drives are somehow inaccessible to your agent or to a family member, that someone has a way of accessing your data. And then as I tried to emphasize, or as I mentioned previously, it's very important that you provide detailed instructions defining your wishes for your digital assets. not just the disposition of things like your Facebook account and that and so forth, but like for example, many of you have probably heard of the writer Franz Kafka, right? So he died at a very young age of tuberculosis, and his writer friend Bertolt Brecht was instructed to burn all of Kafka's manuscripts. Now, this may not be the best example here, because Bertolt Brecht took it upon himself to not follow Kafka's instructions, and the world is grateful that he did not, because otherwise we wouldn't have the work of Franz Kafka. But that's my point, though. You may wish to have all of your emails just deleted when you're gone. There may be, you may have wishes for your digital photos, things along those lines. So it's just important as you're documenting all of your online accounts. The other thing to keep in mind as you're doing that is, well, what do I want to happen with this stuff when I'm gone? And so that's where you start building out the narrative of these more detailed instructions. Any other questions?
I do have a comment. It's short.
Of course, yeah.
Just to point out, the online backup, of course, is important, but that is just another asset that needs to be put in the list. One of the things I noticed from my parents and grandparents, one of the most important things to them digitally are their photos. And inevitably, they always lose them, or they don't know how to get back to them, or they lose the password for them. And it's key to know how to get to your photos. And ideally, maybe Patrick can help you with this, make it so they're useful and you can pull them up at any time, and they're all, but those are definitely things that I know are important to me. And it's just very painful when you lose them. So
yeah, absolutely. And to that point, if you're already using if you're using an iPhone, and unless you've changed your settings, all of your photos from your phone, they get backed up to the cloud automatically. On Android phones, you actually have to go in and do some setup, but Google Photos is a great app, and it's actually available for both iDevices and for Android devices. First off, it backs up all your photos for free, as long as you're willing to allow Google to reduce the size of the photos a bit. The quality is still really good, certainly good enough for most applications, like looking at the photos on a tablet or a phone or a computer, or even on a digital photo frame. If you're wanting to get like actual physical prints of your photos, you definitely want to preserve them in their original state and the original size. Just a couple of points there. What are your legacy options for online services? So as I mentioned before, you can designate an agent as the legacy contact for some password manager programs, but also your Facebook and Google accounts. There are specifically features that those services provide that allow you to designate a legacy contact. I did some searching to check out some other things, like different types of email services and that sort of thing. They may or may not have this option out there. So anything that you're using, there's still people who use Hotmail, who use AOL. You might want to check and see what your options are for those types of services. As I mentioned, some don't provide survivor access to deceased user accounts, and some require that you provide documentation of attorney, you as the account holder, if they want to be able to access some of these accounts. So you'll have to verify whether or not that's something that is needed for some of the other services that you may be using.
I might just jump in.
I just got to,
I was going to say
please.
real quick. I remember it was probably a few years ago. I got curious about how do you close down an account of a dead person, like Facebook, and it turns out they all are different. Well, all meaning I'm just talking social media here. So I
Sure.
remember Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and there was the third one or fourth one, I mean. But some require that, you know, Rob knows all about this, you know, death certificate. Some you actually send it in the US mail. I mean,
Wow.
It's really interesting that if you really burrow into this, the differentiations just for these social media accounts. Because you see, you know, don't we all see dead people on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. I think, isn't that weird? But not everybody knows like what to do.
Right, right. Yeah, and I've seen, like I had an uncle who passed, and his one of his daughters must have acquired access to his account because she put a post up on his behalf, basically saying, "Hey, I'm dead." So, you know, not to make light of it, but yeah. I'd like to open it up for more questions if people have questions. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Kim, thanks for joining. Glad you could make it.
I'd just like to ask Rob, what are some of the maybe stories or examples or watch out for this, you know, without obviously divulging private information, but are there trends? Are there, you know, what are some things you've just seen anecdotally, maybe?
There are always legal issues with this type of stuff. For example, if without your knowledge, I socially hacked your passwords, i.e., I convinced your granddaughter to go into your house and take your password book. I took some pictures of it, and now I have the ability I have your passwords. I didn't have to hack it. I just have them. Well, that's illegal, right? For me to enter your account without permission. Well, there are some quite strict and felony level federal laws that say you are not allowed to go into somebody else's account. And it's so strict that even if you said, go ahead, do it, here's my password, that too would be illegal, even though you just got through giving me verbal permission to do it. Well, people do that all the time. You know, for example, what Patrick said is this young woman who went on her uncle's Facebook page and let everybody know. Well, according to that statute, she just committed a crime. And because he never gave her permission to do that. And I've never seen anybody prosecuted for it because those people have well-meaning intentions. But it is something that I'm like, wow, that is, you know, your easy workarounds where you give somebody your password may be actually illegal as well. And so in that case, the workaround is you actually name them your agent in a written document like a power of attorney. Anecdotally, with most things like this, the people you go to with your power of attorney often don't know what a power of attorney is, how it works, whether they should take it, whether they shouldn't take it. Everybody who's working in a hospital, everybody who's working in a bank, everybody who's are not attorneys. So they, nor do attorneys know this either. You kind of have to specialize in estate planning to even understand how a lot of these documents work. And it's very, very common for people to say, no, we can't take that, or we have to have the original, or all these things that they come up with which aren't true, but they feel like they have to have these strict policies because what if you let somebody come in and access your client's bank account and empty it? Who's liable for that? The bank? They let it happen. But the person came in with a power of attorney. And so that's where I've seen a lot of problems is people who actually have a right to do it go into the bank and the banks go, no, sorry, you don't have, we can't give you access. So it's just a lot of misunderstanding of how things work. And rightly so. It's not like we have any PBS specials on powers of attorney, nor was there a class in college on powers of attorney. It's just something, the only way you learn it is by experiencing it, unfortunately. And yes, Martha, you can give specific access in your powers of attorney. Also, as Patrick noted, in your wills for your personal representative and in your trust for your trustee. All these, quote, agents or fiduciaries should be given express power, meaning in writing, to say my agents have powers, my agent has power to access my digital accounts, including any social media, any bank accounts, any financial accounts, my gaming, things. I know no one on this channel will recognize this, but there are a lot of video games out there for kids, and they will spend, no joke, 10 hours a day playing video games, and that's low. There are kids that play much longer than that. And over time, the things they develop in these games become valuable. And they have been able to sell those things that they have developed, a character, an item. And there are items that have sold in these games for over $100,000, and how do you, it's purely just a digital construct. It's nothing but ones and zeros, but it's worth over $100,000. Well, if that person dies or becomes incapacitated, number one, no one will know that's there, right? But even if the person did give access, or maybe didn't give them access, but bragged about having this asset, and somebody else went in with their password and sold that asset, they've just committed a crime, and a pretty extensive one, because there's money involved. And so, that's a good question. There's a lot of legal aspects to this and a lot of rules. And I guess the only advice I have is, number one, make sure you know everything that you have, and then make sure that you give express authority for them to be able to access it. And unfortunately, it takes time, but going account by account and determining what the rules are. Google has different rules than Facebook. Facebook has different rules than your bank. Your bank has different rules from your online, social media accounts. I mean, each person, it's just a contract with them that they get to decide how it's going to work.
Yeah, like, and as you were mentioning earlier or a moment ago about my cousin, if there was a more litigious person in the family who had a problem with that could have created a serious problem for my cousin if she wasn't the designated agent for her father's Facebook account. So, yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. I had a question and it escaped me, so I'm going to let somebody else ask a question while I try to think of what that was. Teresa, did you have a question?
Yeah, so like for the password manager, so can you kind of walk me through how that works? Like, so I'm going to an account, I forgot the password. What is my next step?
So a lot of the password managers have a browser plugin. So if you're using, say, Google Chrome to go to somebody's website, when you get to the login page, you can actually, some of them you can set up so that when you are on, I'm going to say, for example, the US bank website that you're going to log in where you have an account. As long as you have a corresponding entry in your password manager, and some of them have the ability to recognize, hey, you're on the US bank website, and it'll just, it'll either prompt you or give you the option to just click on something, populate your password in your username and password in the login screen, click the login button, and Bob's your uncle. Really simple and easy. Some of the ones that don't necessarily have the plugin, you can just open your password manager, find the entry for that particular thing, US Bank in this instance, copy your password, paste it in the browser, and you're good to go. You've probably been prompted to save your passwords by your browser. Most of the browsers want you to use them to record your username and password. There have been some security issues surrounding that in the past where, and those have, I think, since been resolved. In fact, Google now is rolling out essentially a full-blown password manager as part of Chrome. And then on the Mac, there's the Keychain app that's integrated with, like, for example, Safari and other Apple-specific software. Excuse me. They're okay. The browser-based password managers are okay, but there are probably passwords that you have to things that are not something you access through your browser. Like you probably have apps on your phone that require a password. That's a browser-based password manager is not helpful in that particular instance. Whereas if you needed to sign into, say, your banking app on your phone, you would probably want to have the password manager app on your phone as well, so that you can look up that password and then, copy paste it into your banking app. Some of them, I'm actually still shopping around for a new password manager myself. I have some that I recommend to folks just based on the ratings and the features that are available. And I can share that information with folks as well. In fact, I'll probably add that slide to the slide deck, and I'm going to make the slide deck available to the meeting participants later today. I'll set up a download for that for you folks. Anyhow, but I'm still shopping for one myself that would have the ability to basically integrate with my other apps on my phone. I'm not sure that actually one exists that does that. I think you actually have to copy and paste between your password manager and your other apps, but I'll report back on that because I'm still shopping. Anyhow, did I answer your questions, Teresa?
Yes. So the password manager, like, say, so if we have it on the phone, is there a password to access the password manager? Because
Yes.
if someone steals my phone,
yep.
They'd have access to
not
everything.
good. Yeah, right. Not good. That's not a good scenario. Yeah, so the password manager apps all have a master password. And as I was mentioning earlier in the call, that's one of the, actually the beauty of having a password manager is that you basically only have to remember one password, how to get into your password manager. And it's actually, that raises a good point. That master password, I mean, that's the keys to the kingdom, right? So you don't want to lose that guy. You want to have so the only password I ever want you to write down on a piece of paper and keep somewhere is your master password for your password manager. But that should go into a sealed envelope, and there should be a copy in your safe deposit box if you have one of those. There should be a copy in your home safe or wherever you store your important documents at the home. That needs to be accessible to your agent so that they know how to get into your password manager. Plus, if you just for whatever reason forget your master password, there's not an easy way to recover from that without having, in fact, I'm not sure there really is a way to recover from that without actually having the master password. Again, I need to do my homework on some of these more recent password apps as to whether they have a master password recovery feature. So those two things are my homework. The that I'll share with folks on my blog at a later date. Go ahead.
So I bought a Dell computer, and it seems to have a password manager already on it. So sometimes it just automatically comes up, and I don't have a password on it. So I don't know, put a password on it?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably want to look at the settings and see if you can set a master password. And if not, I would suggest shopping for a different password manager app, because that's a security risk in my opinion.
Because it was built into the computer already.
Yeah, I mean, they could, I mean, now is it like, for example, like what browser do you use?
I'm using Chrome.
Okay, and is it, and it's not the Chrome password manager, the one that's built into Chrome?
Maybe.
Because the default setting for Chrome and pretty much for every browser is to remember your passwords. So the first time you go somewhere on a new computer, on the browser, whatever your browser of choice is, the first time you go somewhere where you have to log in, that browser is like 99% of the time is going to ask you, do you want me to remember this password? And so that's probably, I'm going to take a guess that that's Chrome. Chrome, now maybe the standalone, I'm not sure if it's standalone because I just read about it in the last couple of days. I mentioned a moment ago that, excuse me, that Google put out or some kind of password manager that works with Chrome. Essentially, I think it's standalone, but I'm not sure. So my first question would be, does it have a master password? Because the one that's built into Chrome or any other, and I don't think even Keychain, I'll have to look at Keychain, but like the old Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari uses Keychain. They all, none of those have a master password. So they're counting on you having a password for you to log into your computer as your first line of defense for those passwords. So that's just something to think about. If you don't have if you don't require a password, or now they have like biometric, Windows has biometric, like it'll scan your face with your built-in web camera to log into Windows now. You know, they're counting on you having some other method of authentication to get into your computer to protect those passwords when you're using the browser-based password feature. I got to drink something. All right. So Rob, on the powers of attorney, is there a specific power of attorney that we should be, that people will need to draft to cover the digital assets? Or among the powers of attorney associated with your last will and testament, which one is the one to include that information?
Okay. Powers of attorney only are in effect while someone's still alive. So they really have no relation to the person's will. The will only goes into effect when someone dies. Some people are confused that the power of attorney somehow gives people power after they die. It does not. It really only goes into effect when the person is still living and terminates upon their death. That being said, there's primarily, well, in my practice, we use two different types, one for medical and one for financial. It corresponds with the court appointment of people, if you needed one. A conservator is financial and a guardian is medical. Obviously, the guardian has much broader powers than just medical. They decide where you live, what kind of food you're going to eat, depending on how much care you need. And the financial side is pretty much everything that has to do with money or payment for anything. And so what we're talking about here is just the financial side. The guardian could have some input as to how a social media account should be used for someone. But I suspect that if somebody is at a level of incapacity that they need a guardian or a agent under medical power of attorney, they're probably not tweeting. At best, they're sharing photos or things that are happening in their life so that their families know, and that they may be looking through their social media accounts so they can find out what other people are doing as well. In that case, sure, an agent can help with that. But that would be a financial agent, probably not the medical. And for most people, it's just the same person. They don't usually split that. They usually say this, my spouse will take care of that for me. My son, my daughter will take care of all that for me. Every once in a while, but somebody says, oh, my son's an accountant, so he'll have the financial power. And my other son's a nurse, so he'll take care of the medical stuff.
Could I just follow up then, Rob? So we've actually done that in our will, like so-and-so, or, we'll handle the business part, and so-and-so, has a medical power of attorney. But I was going to say, so once you're dead, then is there some other document that's part of the will that says, I gather, this daughter was going to handle this social media, this daughter will handle this, bank account. Is that language then expressly in the will?
No, a will, number one, only handles those assets that are still in the person's name. And for most digital assets, that's going to be true. So since that's what we're talking about today, the personal representative, if you need to open a probate account, ideally good estate planning sets it up so nobody has to go to court.
Right.
Okay. In that case, you have to give somebody power through the actual social media account itself, such as Google allows you to name somebody, Facebook allows you to name somebody. I would go ahead and give your personal representative power within your will, saying my personal representative has this power, but technically they're not a personal representative until they go to court and get appointed.
Well, that's a little confusing. So wait a minute. In the will, you say so-and-so is my personal representative, and that encompasses, ABC kinds of activities. But then what you just said threw me off.
Yes, because we use English, and English is imprecise. What it should say is, I nominate this person to be, if necessary, to be appointed by the court as my personal representative. And if you read a will, that's what it says. But when we're speaking English, we just say, this person's going to be my personal representative. But the document itself, like when somebody says, I have a living will, well, there's nowhere on the document that says it's a living will, because that's not what they're called legally, right? Okay. So your personal representative, and many people, because of that confusion, will go ahead and give the nominated personal representative that power anyway, but technically they don't have power until the court gives them that power.
But that might not even be an issue, right? You're saying technically. So
well, again, it's the misunderstanding of the law. If you go to a bank and say, can I empty this bank account? They're dead, and they will just give us a death certificate. And you go, here you go. Well, legally, they just broke the law, but if they're willing to give over the money and nobody's trying to commit fraud, okay. Same thing on the other side. If you go to the DMV with a small estate affidavit, which should work, and say, I'd like to transfer this because the person died, and they're going to, you have to go to court and get, appointed. Well, that's not true. But now what do you do? Because the DMV won't let you do what you're allowed to do. You have to go to, what are you going to do? Sue them?
So I have one other follow-up question, perhaps. So I have my husband as my, for my bank account, the phrase, what you're just talking about. So should I be dead? Because we have separate accounts. So he can go in, he's a death person, power, what's it called again? Power of?
Under your will or under the?
Oh, the bank account.
Oh, the financial power of attorney?
No, he could just go in and he could.
Oh, he's a co-signer?
Yeah, but he's not a co-signer on my account. We don't have the same account, but should I be dead, he can go in and access the money. So my question is,
beneficiary.
Yeah. So could a person have a second person? Like, let's say we're going on this trip and then we're both dead. Then what happens to that money in my account or his account if we only have each other?
You would name a successor pay on death beneficiary. Almost all accounts allow you to name more than one. if you ever,
Okay, that's where I was gonna go. Yeah.
if you're going to name a minor child, just make sure that you name a custodian for that minor child underneath the Transfer to Minors Act. So you would just say my husband and then my minor child with, you know, Joyce acting as the custodian underneath the Transfer to Minors Act.
Okay.
Well, that's quite long. I would just write that in there by hand if possible.
Well, I should just go back to my attorney and we get this, you know,
You
expanded.
should definitely go through each asset and think in your mind, how is this going to get from my name to the person I want to have it?
Right.
And
right.
that's usually what I do with my clients, just practically go, okay, this is what's going to happen. This person's going to go here. You know, they're going to do this, they're going to do this. And once you go through a couple iterations of different assets, you start to see the pattern of, oh, okay, it's pretty much the same rule for everything. Life is complex. The rules are fairly simple. And if you don't know the rules well enough, then the rules seem complex. But it pretty much is the same across the board. And I think that's true for, if you went to an accountant, it all sounds very confusing. But in their mind, it's like, it's the same rule. Why do you guys keep asking me the same question? Whether it's your car, your house, it's all depreciable. So stop asking, you know? And it's, I just recognize that I know the rules inside and out, but no one else does. And so of course they're going to ask again and again and again until they start to figure out, oh, there is a pattern.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Rob, just to kind of recap, can you just, and I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself, but can you just tell us again, what is the, just briefly, what's the specific way to designate the beneficiary who controls things like your digital assets effectively? How are they specified in the will?
Okay. In the will, your will only controls those things that are still in your name. So pretty much all your digital assets. At that point, your personal representative, if appointed, will have power to access those assets.
Okay.
If not, they should be allowed to use a small estate affidavit to say, which is a different form, that shortcuts the having to go to court. They should be willing to take a small estate affidavit, specifically if the will itself says my personal representative will have this power, then they should also allow the person underneath the small estate affidavit to do it. Do they have to? No. Honestly, nobody has to let anybody do anything. The only way that's going to happen is if they go to court and sue them to make them do it. And in that case, you wouldn't do that. You would just open up a probate estate. Because that's easier than suing somebody. And that's the downside, is people don't feel obligated to help people because they're afraid of getting sued. They'd rather, force you to do something more difficult than take the risk that you might, sue them later. Which is kind of sad, because you would think that when somebody dies, people want to help as much as they can, but we live in the society we live in and people are scared. So.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. Hey, I'm just going to throw up the slides again really quick. I just want to share a couple things before we adjourn. First off, I want to thank Rob for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time and explaining the legal aspects of estate planning relative to digital assets. Very useful information and very, as I said, timely. And I also want to point out, I've got some more talks scheduled for August. August 6th, I'm going to be talking about a product called, I'm actually have two guests. The people who work with a product called Hey Herbie. Hey Herbie is essentially this box you can attach to your television, and it allows you to run the equivalent of a Zoom call and do other things like that, all from your TV. It's definitely a senior focused product, and it should be a good discussion. And then on the 20th, I'm going to have a guest, Leanne Langdon, who is a personal trainer and fitness coach, and she's going to be talking to us about fitness tech, apps and devices that you can use to monitor your fitness and so forth, as well as what her experience has been like doing fitness classes over Zoom, which she's had to do, throughout the pandemic. And full disclosure, Leanne Langdon is my wife. So anyhow, I'm going to check the chat really quick here to see if we have any other questions. Okay, we've got Rob's contact info. Okay, cool. And I also wanted to include that here as well. So there's Rob's contact information, and that'll be in the slide deck when you get that as well as my contact information. So this will all be included in the slides. Feel free to reach out if you want to connect on Facebook or LinkedIn, like my page, always appreciated. Anyhow, that is, I'm going to stop sharing. That is the end of our presentation for today, unless there's any final questions or thoughts that anyone has.
And of course, you can call me anytime. I don't charge for answering questions that are educational. I also don't charge for initial consultations because I kind of treat it like selling a car. I tell you what cars are on the lot, and you tell me what you're looking for in a car, and then I say, well, these are the cars that are probably you'd like to buy, and you say, well, how much are they? And I'm like, well, this one's $1,500, that one's $3,000, and you go, okay, that's a big difference, and then you choose which package or documents you think are best fit for you, and if you decide not to work with me, no loss. No, you don't have to pay. So
Thank you.
I think it's that we get to know, like, and trust each other before having to spend money.
Agreed. And for that matter, I actually offer the same service. I provide a initial consultation for free. And I've worked with Joyce. Someone asked me to share this. I'm going to share this again. I've worked with Joyce in the past, and a couple of other folks who are also on the call. And so yeah, it's always a pleasure to have my clients attend these things. So very much appreciate everyone's attendance today. Great questions, and look forward to hopefully seeing you again at a future talk. I'll stay on the call here for another minute, so if anyone wants to copy any of this down, they can. I can flip up to Rob's. Let me flip up to Rob's really quick so you can get his phone number or his information. And like I said, I'll be sharing this later today, but if you wanted to jot it down or take a screenshot.
You can also save the chat, at the
yes,
end.
And I'll save the chat as well.
Yeah, and all of us can. You let us, right?
True.
So
yes. Everyone has permission.
Thank you for doing that.
Sure, you bet. Yeah, if you're in the chat and if you're on a computer, there's the button at the bottom with the 3 dots, and you can just click on that and say save chat. But I can include the chat in the downloads. So anyhow, everyone, I hope this was useful to you, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.
Well, Patrick?
Yes.
Maybe you should tell people where this chat goes to, because when I first saved it, I didn't know where it went.
So it depends on where you're, well, it depends on what you're running. If you're running Windows, I'm actually not entirely sure where it goes because I have a Mac.
It goes to document.
Oh yeah, okay, it goes right to documents. Okay, and I think it does the same thing on a Mac. So it must be universal. Cool, thank you for that tip.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.